Hello and welcome to Pixel Aquarium. Today we're going to be returning to the Fish Iceberg for part 2 of the Fish Iceberg series. So stay tuned for some extremely obscure and strange fish. So now we're going beyond the twilight zone and definitely into the deep sea of this iceberg. These are going to be topics that, if you're interested in fish, you probably know about them, but if you aren't an expert on fish, you're probably going to have never heard of a lot of these things going forward. So first I have 200 plus new species a year. And this, of course, refers to the fact that every year 200 or so species of fish are discovered. And these are completely new to science species of fish. A lot of new species of fish come from either the tropical regions of the world or from the deep sea. So the next thing on this list are the darters of North America, and I think these are just a really underrated group of fish. They're beautifully colorful, but they aren't commonly kept in aquariums just because they are temperate species and most people keep tropical aquarium fish. So there's often this bias towards thinking that tropical fish are the super colorful ones, but temperate freshwater fish can be just as colorful, and this group of fish just really shows that off. There are a lot of species in this. It's actually a subfamily of fish that's endemic to North America. Yeah, there are a lot of these species. Some of them are highly endangered because, of course, the United States doesn't have the best history of taking care of its freshwater ecosystems. Some rivers in the United States used to catch on fire. That's how polluted they were. Water catching on fire, that's kind of insane. I believe some of them have gone extinct, including the Maryland darter has gone extinct. So these are an endangered and frankly underrated group of fish. They're very colorful, very pretty, and if you live in the United States, you should be concerned about protecting them. So that's why they're here and on this list. Okay, up next we have Zephactinus. I think that's how you say it. So Zephactinus is a prehistoric fish. It's one of the better known prehistoric fish because it's been featured in some famous paleo media, including, Swimming with Sea Monsters, I want to say? The one with Nigel Marven. It's kind of a giant prehistoric tarpon, but I just really like this fish. I know that some people don't like this fish because it's a very common fossil to find in certain parts of the world. But I think it's a very lovely prehistoric fish. I just like the idea of, I just like giant fish, so that's why it's on this list. It's been found mostly in Kansas. That part of the United States has a large Cretaceous seabed fossil record, but it's a very interesting fish. I love the fossil of Zephactinus where it's eating another fish and it actually choked to death on this other fish that it was eating because the other fish was about 6 feet long, and so it just got lodged in its gullet and it died and fossilized like that, which must be quite embarrassing for the fish, but it's fascinating fossil to look at. I believe it's in the Smithsonian Museum. So if you're ever visiting Washington, D.C., you can see this fossil for yourself. So the next category we're going to be talking about are the Lake Victoria cichlids. And these are a group of 500 closely related species that are pretty much all endemic to Lake Victoria in Africa. And these are a wonderfully diverse group of fish. They evolved to basically take over many of the niches in the lake, kind of like how Darwin's finches evolved to take over different niches on the Galapagos Islands. So they're a great example of evolution, and they are also kind of colorful fish, so you'll find them in aquariums. They are a bit of a more advanced aquarium fish species just because they are a little bit harder to take care of than a goldfish, but they are somewhat popular in the aquarium trade, as are a lot of the species of cichlid from that region of the world. But the tragic thing about these cichlids is that they are going extinct at an astronomical rate. We've possibly lost up to half or even 60% of them in the last 50 years due to the introduction of the predatory Nile perch to Lake Victoria. So I'm putting these fish here just because they are very endangered and just very ecologically and evolutionarily interesting. I hope that we're able to save some of these species, but it looks like a lot of the damage has already been done, as sadly they are going extinct faster than we can discover them. There were probably more than 500 species in the lake, but 500 is just the estimate we get today because of the tragic events surrounding invasive species in the lake. So we're getting even deeper into this iceberg now, and we're going to get to even more obscure and weird fish-related topics. So we're going to start with pufferfish sand circles. So this refers to a undersea mystery that was recently solved, and people were finding these weird circular patterns on the bottom of the ocean. And of course people had all sorts of theories. Some people probably thought it was aliens because these are kind of like undersea crop circles. But what people were actually surprised to discover is that these weird circular spirally patterns were actually made by pufferfish. The male white-spotted pufferfish spends its time making these intricate circular patterns as part of its plan to attract a mate. So I just find that quite fascinating, that fish, which are just often thought of as seafood, they do have a lot of interesting behaviors, things that we would think of as like birds of paradise doing. Okay, moving on to the next item in this category, we have dark fish. And this refers to deep sea fish, which are difficult to catch and very high in number. Sort of how dark matter makes up 95% of all the matter in the universe. Dark fish make up something like 95% of fish in the world. So they're very similar, and that's why they get a similar name like that. Of course, we do know a lot more about dark fish than we really do about dark matter. We kind of know the types of species which make up dark fish, but scientists were recently surprised by the sheer number of them in the ocean. Originally, the number of fish in the sea had been underestimated by orders of magnitude before the discovery of dark fish. Dark fish are also good at evading fishing vessels and trawls, so they are a little bit harder to catch and study than your more well-known species of fish. I was going to say average fish, but these are actually the average fish because they make up just the massive majority of fish in the sea. So the next thing in this category is Knightia eosina. And this is, maybe it's a little bit well-known, but I think it's obscure enough to earn a spot in this category. This is actually the most common fossilized vertebrate in the world. If you've ever bought a souvenir fossil fish, you may have, without knowing it, bought a Knightia eosina fish. So these are fish, they're kind of related to sardines and herrings, and of course they lived during the Eocene, which is where I believe they get their species name from. Uh, I actually have a few of these fossils myself. They are quite common, and you can buy them at rock shops, and sometimes at dinosaur museums they'll have them. And, I like to call them little stone aquariums. That's a phrase that I have coined for fossilized slabs of fish. I think it's quite nice. And it's quite an interesting fish if you're into fossil collecting and fossil preparation. So the next topic is the cave fish of China. Now, many of the cave fish that live in China are part of the same genus, and that genus is Cynocyclocheilus. And there are 75 species in this genus, though probably many more that haven't been discovered yet. And these are cave fish that are mostly both troglophilic and troglobitic, which means some are associated with caves but not perfectly adapted for caves, while others are cave dependent, meaning they've lost their eyes or have greatly reduced eyes or have no pigmentation or greatly reduced pigmentation. And in addition to that, what makes these fish even weirder is that they have developed strange morphologies to adapt to these caves, including strange horns on their heads. Their heads kind of flatten out, and they develop these long barbels, probably to help them move around in the dark. The horn that some of these fish develop, including the Cynocyclocheilus rhinoceros, which I actually have an image of here for you to look at. This fish is got this weird horn on its head, and that's an unknown to science. We don't know why they have these weird things on their head. So if you're an aspiring ichthyologist, maybe you can be the person to discover why these fish look so weird. Nobody knows. Now, there are of course 75 species in this genus, which is just, wow, that's a lot. I mean, considering there are genuses of fish that have one species, monotypic genera. It's amazing that to have a genus with 75 species. That's just a lot of evolutionary radiation going on with these fish. Many of them have small ranges, and of course living in a cave is an isolating factor, so you'd expect a cave fish to speciate with regard to its ancestor that lives above ground. But it's just amazing that I guess there are so many caves in this region that these fish are just speciating like wild. And of course, along with that comes extremely small ranges for most of these fish, and the threat of pollution. So if a cave is polluted, that fish is probably going to go extinct. Because caves are extremely fragile environments, these fish are already adapting to having very little food and energy, so any external threats to them will probably make them extremely vulnerable to extinction. But these are fascinating, strange-looking fish that many of them are just recently discovered because they live in caves, and I just like to think about like a species of this genus that's just living in a cave that's never going to get discovered because we just don't know where that cave is. And that's just really fascinating. So that's why these fish made this list, is because they're really interesting, weird, unique, and strange looking. I hope these topics were interesting to you, and I guess if you made it this far in the video, they must have been at least slightly interesting to you. So thank you for watching,